one of the more pressing stories in the world of Canadian soccer, and that was Thursday's meeting of Quinn, Sophie Schmidt, Janine Beckie, and Christine Sinclair in front of the Heritage Committee in Ottawa. It was a 2-hour marathon. For those of you who stuck through it all, you deserve some kind of prize. I don't know what it is, but you deserve one. There were audible cackles of, did the politician really just say that? And are you kidding me? Several times. But we'll digest all of that now. We've had a few days. I will give the first word on this matter to you, Gareth Wheeler. There were 2 hours, 120 minutes of takeaways to choose from. What are some of the things that stood out to you the most?
Okay, let's start big picture, then we'll kind of focus in on some smaller issues. There's clearly real, true hurt and distrust that the players have of the Canadian Soccer Association, hence why they ended up there in the first place. And I just, I was kind of pinching myself saying, in a bad way, by the way, saying like, have we really come to this from where we were less than a year ago with Canada, the men's national team first qualifying for World Cup, and even the process after seemingly looking like things were moving in the right direction for the women being part of a group that's achieving a landmark collective bargaining agreement to sitting in front of politicians who, quite frankly, don't know the game, don't know the inner workings of FIFA, don't know the inner workings of soccer in this country in general. Asking a lot of questions, which most of them I'm not sure were productive or led the conversation in a proper way. Like little things really bothered me, and maybe that's because I've been in part of the Canadian soccer community my entire life, like belittling the men's national team and their ranking multiple times, comparing them to the women's. Like, don't you know what they've done for this country, the men's national team, through this process, just to try to win over favor of the panel?
I'm sure they were all waving their flags a couple of months ago, Wheels, don't worry.
But even for the women's national team, like now their financial or the economic strength of the association, as well as in their own individual pockets, they rely on one another. Like, success for both programs will be a success for everyone else involved. So the divisive comments like that, suggesting that the women's players like should have a say in who's hired as coach of the team. Like, where did that come from? Did someone plant that with the politician? Because that was completely out of left field. And last time I checked, John Herdman and Bev Priestman were both hired by the CSA, and both have been amazing for the program and for the country in general. So there was a lot of things like that bothered me. When it got down to it all, I'm not sure that we investigated enough how we got to this point. There was a lot of kind of pie in the sky conversations about a lot of things, but not specifics. Like, the track record of success by the Canadian women's national team, how we ended up in a spot where there's so much animosity and where the development of the women's game hasn't taken that step forward in this country. There didn't seem to be answers to that. Nothing was brought up about hosting the under-20 World Cup. Nothing was brought up about hosting the under-15 World Cup in 2015, which should be landmark moments. Like a time when actually Canada soccer did step up really on behalf of the women and hosted those events when the rest of the world were still turning their back and really not investing in the women's game. Canada really wasn't one of those countries, if we're going to tell the truth about it. The fact that coming out of it, the decision was made at some level at the CSA that paying NWSL salaries was good enough in the way to go. This has been a big problem all along, is not taking advantage of those moments to build up professional infrastructure in this country. So what led us to this moment? Was it a lack of corporate buy-in? Was it mismanagement within the Canadian Soccer Association alone? Was it the inability to find a broadcast partner and there simply being no money on the table to pursue these types of endeavors? Like, these are the productive conversations that we can actually have. And there's no one better to speak to it than the women's players who were there that day, because they've really been part of the ups and downs and everything in between and trying to grow the game in this country, right? So I found that there was a lot of places that the conversation could have been, instead of relying upon facts, it was really leaning into the emotional side, and we all understand that. And I think that largely people are sympathetic to their case. But in situations like this, it should be the role of the government to deal with the world of fact. Before Oli, you jump in, there was one, I think, a productive question, and I believe it was by Michael Couteau, who asked, okay, so you're speaking about the CSB in terms of the broadcast and sponsorship deals. Is there anything else like it? no one seemed to really know the true answer to that question. That's fundamental to some of the grievance that's going on. The issue of some was brought up in the United States. They partnered with the U.S. Soccer Federation for 20 years, just up until the last year. And they made sure that broadcast rights were sold and sponsorships were made, because guess what? The free market didn't step up to support soccer in the United States over that time. Now their business has grown. Now they're in a completely different place where they can go on and build the game. The U.S. Soccer Federation, with the professional infrastructure that's being built through having that relationship. And it wasn't brought up that before CSB was in place, it's trying to build up that ecosystem in Canadian soccer, that IMG oversaw that account for Canadian soccer. Like, these are fundamentals for people to actually determine what's right, what's wrong, wrap their head around a very, very complicated and delicate issue, and come up with some maybe progressive conclusions that can see some resolution to the issues at hand. Sorry, rant done.
No, there's a lot of good points in there. There's a few things that I just want to add, and then we'll get Oli to weigh in here. It seemed unfair that they sprung, like, we finally got that good question at like what, hour one or minute 117. Like, if this was something on their agenda, which it probably should have been higher, why not ask that at the beginning? Not when the chair went around for the sixth time, opening the door for more questions. And to Janine Beckie's credit, who was probably one of the few adults in the room, in my opinion, for that entire ordeal, she tried to answer, but it was a bit frustrating when she specified that my understanding was that it was only a couple of years, and the fact that there was nobody there to sort of stick their hand up and say some was like a 2 decades project was unfortunate, because these four incredible people are footballers first, and Janine is very good at speaking, but it shouldn't be her responsibility to educate these politicians. And I mean, Monsieur Lemire at one point at the Bloc Québécois is trying to compare Christine Sinclair to Mikhail Kingsbury. It's like, what is this conversation really accomplishing so early? But there were just so many moments like that, as you allude to, Gareth. That's like, I feel like there are bigger fish to fry here that aren't being fried. And again, this is me being a millennial at the end of a Gen Z or whatever I am. But I think of the meme of Gordon Ramsay with the baby, like, oh my God, gorgeous, precious, I'm so sorry. And then screaming at the adult. That's what it's probably going to feel like to me when the CSA is invited to testify at the end of the month as well, or invited to speak to the Heritage Committee. Oli, sorry for that tangent, but I just wanted to add those points.
Don't apologize. It means I can stay out of this conversation, which I would rather do for longer. In honor of our elected representatives, I've decided to put zero effort into today's show. Won't be doing any research or any preparation. I think you guys might be slightly disappointed with that approach, to which I say, well, I'll repeatedly say it's a pleasure and a privilege to be sharing this stage with you. I couldn't be happier to be here.
Would you like a selfie?
Honestly, like, I'll also be taking random shots at my enemies throughout proceedings. In all seriousness, like, I felt bad for the players, to be honest, because I think there's parts of their case I agree with. There's parts of what they said that I didn't fully agree with, but ultimately I think they saw this as an opportunity to, have that stage and to air their grievances, state their case, do so in a formal manner, put it all on the record, put it all out there. And it was very difficult for them to do that when they're being asked questions that just weren't particularly insightful, particularly relevant to the matter at hand. There were one or two MPs, to not tar them all with the same brush, who I think did put a bit more effort into things and tried to ask relevant questions. I don't think they always had their facts in line, even the better ones. Excuse me, but there are also a few who, were very clearly taking shots at the Liberal government and the Minister of Sport because they're from an opposition party, even at times like trying to tee up the players to take that shot for them. And you could see that the players knew it. They're not stupid and were uncomfortable doing so. So, like, I thought it was all a bit of a farce, to be honest. And like I said, I was disappointed for the players as much as anything, because I don't think they got the opportunity that they were expecting to, like I said, kind of state their case here.
Yeah, they deserve, like, the players deserve the biggest audience, the biggest position possible. But, if you want to get to the crux of the issue, then the questions being asked need to be more introspective and more fact-based. The one thing on the day, I don't know how you guys felt about this, like, the big thing that happened last Thursday, like, it was a big moment for the women to meet in front of the Heritage Committee, but really just in terms of the evolution of the story was the Canadian Soccer Association finally disclosing and going public with what looked to be a potential landmark CBA deal that's been on the table reportedly, at least according to them, since last June, when everything went sideways with the men's team. What did you guys make of the proposal? Because a couple things stood out to me, that this deal would potentially make the Canadian women's national team the second highest paid or well compensated national team in the world. Like that is significant. And last time I checked, just in terms of their overall budget and financial power and their economic strength, Canada Soccer is nowhere near to being the second strongest federation in global football. It's not even in the top 70, guys. Like, so that is a phenomenal outlay for the women's national team. And for the men's team, the similar terms, and the men's team have publicly aligned themselves in the pursuit of equal opportunity, equal investment, equal pay with the women's team. It would still make the men a top 10% team in terms of what they're able to make through this process as well. And when you do the numbers, depending on how the women do at the Women's World Cup, I mean, this could be an outlay of well over $200,000 per player coming away for qualifying for the World Cups. I mean, what did you guys make of some of the numbers presented? Because, you know, my first thing is like, this could mean big things for the players, and maybe this could eradicate some of their concerns, maybe not all of them, but maybe enough where the CBA we can approach it, because everyone, I think, just wants to get a deal done here for the good of the game in this country. But also in the back of my head, I'm like, and I think it's very important to point out, because the CSB deal has been made out to be something that, to me, it absolutely isn't. The CSB deal, I think we've dealt with it on this show, is building Canadian professional soccer infrastructure, giving people a chance in this country. And it's trying to grow the pot, not shrink it. But this CSB deal's in place, and the CSA is still able to go out and pay these kind of numbers to their players, making the women the second highest, most well compensated team in the world, and the men a top 10, in terms of percent. That tells me and raises the question, like, there are clearly other ways that the Canadian Soccer Association can and will be making money in the coming years. So this whole notion that the CSB is making people broke or not being able to pay certain entities, like, doesn't that kind of spit in the face of that? Again, we're not privy to the numbers, but with the CSB deal in place, it's still able to provide this sort of ability to compensate the players. That has to be seen as a positive thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, like, I only have a couple, and that's why I'll go first, and then I'll take it away. For me, it's the biggest word, and I think I counted the word transparency, even spoken at the Heritage Committee, like 175 times. That's a step forward towards transparency, right? Because this is officially their position. It's been put publicly out there for everyone to see and screenshot and nitpick and scrutinize, which is their right when they make that information available. So now it's like there's no recanting from that, from their perspective and what they're willing to offer. What frustrates me is that, like, the issue with the debate about the timing. I do agree it probably could have been made a couple of days earlier, but you can't also say it's unfair to put them in that position while also demanding and banging the drum for transparency. If they had released that press release 2 or 3 days later, the CSA, people would have been like, well, why wasn't this released before the Heritage Committee? So it just seemed like one of those environments where no one was ever going to be happy. But even when you have the politicians, and this is the last comment I'll make about them, making things like, wasn't it disgusting? Wasn't it infuriating that they did that, and leading the players into that comment that they'd make, that it's the timing of it. I think everyone's going to have a different opinion. If you're used to labor negotiations, at least experiencing them from a consumer, if you've been involved in them, it's a tactic. And I didn't love when there was so much of, well, we don't want to negotiate in public, yet one side of the argument is making public statements constantly about not having enough information.
Again, that's the emotional side. I understand why people would feel differently about that being released, which is fine. But now finally the public, and I think that we've been brought along in the media too, being brought along this journey. Now you actually have hard numbers to deal with.
Yes, and I think that's important,
right? Oli, I'm not sure what you made of the numbers, but those were kind of my big picture takeaways.
The offer is extremely good. Like Wills, I agree with you completely that I never really thought that the CSB is what's holding back the federation here. I think it's one of the biggest fictions and fantasies in this whole thing. People like to use the word siphoning a lot these days, I find. Siphon money. It's like a very sinister sounding word.
Is
And
it
anyway,
a P or an S or a C? I don't know. It's very
PH,
confusing.
S-I-P-H-O-N.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it is a really good offer. And a couple of things on that. My first question is, given all we've heard about the state the Federation is in, apparently, in terms of budget cuts and so on, can they afford this offer? That was my first thought, right? Like you said, Wheels, I think there are revenue opportunities for the Federation that they haven't fully explored, and maybe a new administration can do that and, put them in a better financial position. Let's hope so. But it's a really strong offer that compares to a lot of much bigger federations around the world. And the second thing, that kind of comes out of that is that with that being the case, I think if this was just about the money to the players now, they would have signed that deal last year, right?
Good
like
point.
there's not really any kind of holes you can pick in it in terms of, unless there's a problem with the equal pay and the World Cup prize money distribution, and getting the two teams to agree on that. Like it's a very compelling offer. So that, I think, illustrates to you more than ever that this is about other things for these players now. The financial transparency that keeps getting talked about, figuring out exactly how much the Federation can afford, where the money is, where it's going. I think, to be honest, those things have almost taken precedence now for the players over what are we going to earn in match fees and World Cup prize money and so on.